Imagine a world where the primary language of the American Midwest is not English, but French. Imagine a map where the United States is a narrow coastal strip, forever hemmed in by a massive, fortified Napoleonic empire stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. In the year 1802, this was not a fantasy. It was the active master plan of the most powerful man in the world. Napoleon Bonaparte had dispatched a massive armada across the Atlantic to secure a gateway to the New World, intending to turn the Gulf of Mexico into a French lake. But as his elite veteran troops stepped onto the tropical soil of the Caribbean, they weren't met by an army they could outmaneuver or a fortress they could siege. Instead, they were greeted by an invisible, silent executioner. What if the fate of the North American continent wasn't decided by generals on a battlefield, but by a microscopic virus and the mosquito that carried it? Today, we explore how yellow fever became the single greatest obstacle that shattered Napoleon's dreams of a global empire. By the turn of the 19th century, the geopolitical landscape was a tinderbox of imperial ambition. Napoleon Bonaparte, having recently consolidated power as first consul of France, looked toward the West with a hunger that rivaled his European conquests. In 1800, through the secret treaty of San Ildefonso, France reacquired the Louisiana Territory from a weakened Spain, a staggering 828,000 square miles of land that effectively doubled the size of the nascent United States. However, Louisiana was a land without a lock. To control the interior of North America, Napoleon needed a secure naval base and a reliable source of labor and supplies in the Caribbean. His eyes turned to Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti. At the time, Saint-Domingue was the wealthiest colony in the world, producing 40% of the world's sugar and 60% of its coffee. It was the economic engine of the French Empire, fueled by the brutal enslavement of nearly 500,000 Africans. The challenge was that the colony had been in a state of revolution since 1791. Led by the brilliant Toussaint Louverture, the enslaved population had risen up, abolished slavery, and created an autonomous state. For Napoleon, the path to a North American empire required two steps. First, crush the rebellion in Saint-Domingue to restore the slave economy. Second, use the island as a staging ground to flood Louisiana with veteran troops. In January 1802, a fleet of 54 ships carrying 20,000 elite soldiers, many of whom had survived the grueling campaigns of the Rhine and Italy, arrived off the coast of Hispaniola. They were under the command of General Charles Leclerc, Napoleon's own brother-in-law. On paper, it was an overwhelming force. In reality, they were walking into a biological trap that would claim more French lives than the Battle of Waterloo. Chapter 1. The trap is set. The conflict began not as a war against a virus, but as a war of reclamation. Napoleon's secret instructions to Leclerc were cold and calculated. Seize the coastal towns, disarm the population, and once control was established, reinstitute the Code Noir, effectively returning the liberated population to the horrors of chattel slavery. The French forces were the finest in Europe. They arrived with heavy artillery, cavalry, and a rigid belief in their own tactical superiority. Toussaint Louverture, however, understood a fundamental truth that the Europeans did not. He knew that the European Constitution was not built for the tropics. As the French took the ports of Le Cap and Port-au-Prince, Louverture ordered his generals to retreat into the rugged, mountainous interior. He famously told his subordinates, "Do not forget that while we wait for the rainy season, which will rid us of our enemies, we have only fire and destruction to oppose them." Louverture's strategy was one of attrition. He knew that time was on his side. While the French won the initial conventional battles through sheer firepower, they were forced to maintain a high-density presence in the coastal lowlands, the exact environment where the Aedes aegypti mosquito thrived. By March 1802, the French were celebrating a victory on the battlefield, unaware that the invisible enemy had already begun to infiltrate their barracks. Chapter 2. A world of salt, sugar, and blood. To understand the scale of this tragedy, we must look at the everyday reality of the French soldier in 1802. For the average grenadier Life in Saint-Domingue was a disorienting nightmare of heat and humidity. These men were dressed in heavy wool uniforms designed for the temperate climates of France and Germany. They marched through dense tropical forests and stagnant marshes, their bodies constantly under siege by insects they viewed as a mere nuisance. The everyday for the local population was a mixture of revolutionary fervor and survival. The former slaves had built fortified villages in the mountains known as maroon communities. They practiced guerrilla warfare, striking at French supply lines at night and disappearing into the brush by dawn. They lived on a diet of yams, tropical fruits, and local game, while the French depended on salted meats and flour shipped from Europe supplies that often arrived rancid or were intercepted. In the French camps, the atmosphere shifted from bravado to dread. As the heat of the summer intensified, the black vomit, the dreaded vomito negro, began to appear. Doctors of the era, still decades away from understanding the germ theory of disease, attributed the illness to miasma, or bad air, rising from the rotting vegetation. They treated soldiers with bloodletting, mercury, and purgatives, methods that only accelerated the dehydration and death of the patients. The hospitals became charnel houses, where the groans of the dying were the only constant sound. Chapter 3. The Invisible Executioner. By June 1802, the epidemic reached its terrifying peak. Yellow fever is a brutal disease. It begins with high fever, chills, and agonizing muscle pain. But its most distinctive and horrific trait is the secondary stage. The virus attacks the liver, causing jaundice, turning the victim's eyes and skin a haunting shade of yellow. Internal hemorrhaging begins, leading to the vomiting of partially digested blood, which appears black. The statistics are staggering. By the end of the summer, Leclerc reported that 160 to 180 men were dying every single day. Out of the initial 20,000 troops, more than half were dead or incapacitated within 5 months. The reinforcements Napoleon sent, another 10,000 men, were swallowed by the disease almost as soon as they disembarked. The psychological impact was devastating. General Leclerc himself wrote a desperate letter to Napoleon. "My position is such that I can no longer hide my anxieties." The mortality continues with a fury that is impossible to describe. Leclerc's own death from the fever in November 1802 marked the functional end of French morale. The rebellion, seeing the French army literally rotting from within, launched a massive counteroffensive. Under the leadership of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the Haitian forces fought with a ferocity born of the knowledge that surrender meant a return to chain. By the end of 1803, the French had lost over 50,000 men, the vast majority to yellow fever. It was a military catastrophe of the highest order. The invincible army of the Orient had been defeated by a mosquito. The consequences of this biological defeat changed the map of the world forever. When news reached Napoleon that his army in Saint-Domingue had been virtually annihilated, his grand western design collapsed. Without Saint-Domingue as a naval base, the Louisiana Territory became a strategic liability, a vast, undefendable wilderness that he could no longer afford to garrison or protect from the British Navy. In a fit of pragmatic frustration, Napoleon decided to cut his losses entirely. He famously remarked, "Damn sugar, damn coffee, damn colonies." He turned to the American envoys, who had only come to negotiate the purchase of the port of New Orleans, and offered them the entire Louisiana Territory for $15 million. This single event, double the size of the United States overnight, opening the door for westward expansion and the eventual rise of the US as a global power, led to the independence of Haiti in 1804, making it the first black-led republic in the world and the only nation established by a successful slave revolt. Shifted Napoleon's focus entirely back to Europe, leading to the Napoleonic Wars that would redraw the borders of the Old World for a decade. The obstacle of yellow fever did more than just kill soldiers. It acted as a pivot point in human history. It proved that even the most brilliant military minds and the most powerful empires are ultimately subject to the raw, unpredictable power of the natural world. It serves as a humbling reminder that a microscopic entity can dictate the fate of continents. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's most consequential what-if scenarios. If the French had possessed a simple vaccine in 1802, the map of North America might look very different today. If you found this exploration of history and science insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell. We have an entire series dedicated to the hidden forces of history, including episodes on how the Black Death reshaped Europe and the impact of the Spanish flu on World War I. What other historical events do you think were decided by nature rather than men? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, keep questioning the world as it is and imagining it as it might have been.